Hello, everyone. My name is Tooways Asmal. Welcome to another episode of Two Ways to Skin a Cat, a show where we talk career experiences, entrepreneurship, and investments. The main aim is to show that there's more than one way to be successful other than just climbing the corporate ladder. We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and the show will be on podcast by tomorrow morning. If you're watching live, drop a one in the comments so that we know we're not talking to ourselves, and drop a two in the comments if you're watching the recording. My guest for this week is Anders Liu-Lindberg, co-founder and COO of the Business Partnering Institute and one of the most knowledgeable finance thought leaders on LinkedIn. If you need finance content that will make you think, look no further than his content on LinkedIn. Anders, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, you guys. It's a true pleasure to be here and just share my story and thoughts with your audience.
So let's jump straight into questions. Maybe let's tell us your story. Where do you come from? And maybe outside of work, who is Anders Liu-Lindberg?
Yeah, so my name is Anders. I'm from Denmark, so I'm based in Copenhagen, in capital there. My career overall is I spent 13 years in corporate, a global transport and logistics company, Maersk. And now I'm an entrepreneur at the Business Partnering Institute, which is a company I helped found back in 2018. And I joined full time early last year. Great time just before the pandemic. But yeah, we can probably talk a lot about that as well. But that's professionally, personally, married, having two kids. One is school age and one is about to start school next year. So that's a great fun age, I would say.
Okay, all right. Very short and sweet. But
That's me.
let's talk a little bit about financial business partnering. So I'm going to be honest with you. The first time I heard of financial business partnering was when I started following you on LinkedIn about 2 years ago. It's not really something that's talked about in South Africa. I'm noticing now more roles starting with financial business partnering, but it's still fairly new. For the audience, can you maybe tell us what is financial business partnering and how is it different to financial accountant or normal accounting position?
So, and thanks for that question, you guys. And for someone that spends pretty much every professional moment I have on this topic, I continue to be amazed by how new it feels to many people and how they may be hearing about it for the first time because we've been talking about it for more than 20 years. So it's interesting that it's still making its waves across the world. So that's, I guess, point number one. Uh, what is it? Well, there's many ways to define it, and I think if you asked anyone in the audience, they would probably have their own definition. At the Business Partnering Institute, our simple definition is insights times influence equal to impact. That's what business partnering is all about. But of course, business partnering is an activity you do to create an impact, which is typically, drive shareholder value creation or whatever value creation definition you have in your company. To do that, we need insights. So information that our business leaders, business stakeholders we support, one, do not know about, but two, can help them make better decisions. Then we have something new perspectives we can bring to the table. Of course, we know it's not enough to be right. Without influence, without buy-in and acceptance for our messages, we get nowhere. So we need influence as well. And that's why it's a multiplier and not just a plus. Because without influence, I'm sorry to say, but you might as well go home. But if we have insights, if we have influence, we do have impact in the form of better decisions, stronger execution, and more value created at the end of the day. So that's the short story on what business partnering is. And if you talk about how is it different to financial accounting, for instance, I mostly talk about the difference between producing and using the numbers. So if you look at some of the more finance operational processes like order to cash, procure to pay, record to report, those are all in the accounting space. And they basically stop when the financial controller have controlled the numbers and say, yes, the quality is okay, right? Then you can say finance has done its job. We are compliant. The numbers are high quality. You business just do what you want. But then we are some that say finance can actually do more. finance can actually be that driver of value creation in the business, that business partner. And that's what it's all about. That's the difference, right? So we use the numbers for something. We bring it to business leaders and say, here's the plan we had. Here's how we're currently performing. How can we improve from here? And I say we, not you, deliberately, because it's a partnership, something we do together with other people. Whereas in accounting, you could in principle sit in front of your screen, control and produce numbers all day long without talking to anyone in the business. So I think those are some of the key differences between, business partnering and accounting, producing and using the numbers. Not to say one is better or one is more important than the other. They live in a symbiosis. We need both. But that's, if that answers the question, I think that's the key difference.
No, it does. The one question I was going to have is the one doesn't replace the other one, and
No,
that's very important. It's very
I
important.
guess one doesn't replace the other, but of course, if we look at the finance operations space today, there's a lot of automation and technology coming in. So of course, the time spent in this area is bound to go down now and in the coming years, which means we must spend more time in the other area, or the bad option become obsolete. And I'm always a fan of different kind of data points that sort of tell us where's the direction heading. And Accenture published a report earlier this year, CFO Now. You can even Google it and find it. And if you read through that report, you will find on one of the first pages saying that the rate of automation of transactional processes in finance has gone from 34, I think, percent in 2018 to 60% today. That's a massive change happening right now, not 5 years, 10 years from now. We're not talking about it. It's happening now. And I think, that's what we need to act on as accounting and finance professionals. Okay, if my job gets automated, what do I do? Rather than saying, then I don't have a job. No, there's plenty of jobs for you, but you need to do something different. And business partnering could be one of those career tracks.
Are you riding the wave or not? So, I mean, you talked a little bit about, you touched on it. Like, I was going to ask you about the future of the accounting profession, but especially for those financial managers and CFO or people who want to be CFOs in particular, what do they need to look out for?
So if you are a leader, I think there are two things. The first is, leading business partners or business partner like roles is different compared to leading accountants. And again, it's not to say anything bad about accountants or something good about business partners. It's just to say they are different. Because accountants work in a very structured way, following set rules like local accounting standards or IFRS or US GAAP, whatever it might be. Right. So there's a process and a structure for how you're supposed to work. And we have checklists, systems with traffic lights and whatnot that shows us, are we doing what we are supposed to or not? Of course, fraud and scandals can still occur, but at the large picture, that's what working in accounting is like. If I'm a leader in accounting, I'm looking at the checklist and the process and the system and say, is it green or ticked off? We've probably done our job. Business partnering is different because it's an activity that happens together with other people. So if you're a leader of business partners, you need to go and observe what's the interaction like between the business partner and the business stakeholder. Is the business partner proactive and taking a leading, facilitating role, or are they sitting at the back of the room just taking notes and being the secretary? And believe me, I've seen both. Are they just simply presenting financials, taking their slot in the calendar, or are they stepping into the business performance area and taking charge of business initiatives? Big difference as well, right? But you can only, as a leader, see how your business partner is doing by observing them in action. Otherwise, you cannot give good feedback. It's impossible to give good feedback if you only have second-hand knowledge about what went on. You ask the business partner, you ask the stakeholder, maybe their story is aligned, maybe not, but you won't know because you haven't seen it. So that's the difference. It's, let's call it more situational leadership, being out there in the field with your people rather than in front of the screen checking the system and the process. Right. So that's one. And I think number two is, which goes to some extent beyond business partnering, but is also at the core of business partnering. It is that the role of the finance leader and the CFO keeps expanding. I think, and of course I'm biased here, but you'll be hard pressed to find any other CXO role that has expanded as much as the CFO role and will continue to expand as much as the CFO role in the coming years. So change is the normal, not the new normal, because it's been like this for years already. But change is the normal. So if you're set in your ways, not changing your finance function, how it works, it's going downhill from there. You need to grab the change, run with the change, be the change, if you can say it like that. I think that's the second point. So lead people in different ways and be the change.
That's great advice. Anybody has any questions for Anders, please add the questions to the comment section now so that we don't miss them, and we'll deal with all the questions towards the end. So, so Anders, before you started the BPI, you worked at a large multinational company, Musk, as you mentioned, and you covered Europe, Middle East, and Africa region. The company has a large presence in South Africa. Can you talk to us about the similarities and the differences in dealing with people from the different regions?
Yeah, so I didn't have the pleasure of dealing with Africa, but definitely dealing with different parts of the business. Right, we also have a large shared service center in India, Philippines, and China. Right, so there's a lot of different cultures at play, and that can be challenging to work in an environment like that. I'm a Dane, so we tend to be, direct and to the point, even though there can be different still preferences, of course, among Danes. But if you work, with other cultures, they might work completely different. Maybe they're very, believe in authority, and if someone says something has to be like that, whereas Danes, for instance, are very challenging and say, yeah, it's all good, leader, but I think differently. But I found, if you stay sort of in the business partnering realm, that having that common language around, good practices for work and how to create value could align anyone in any different culture to actually do the right thing. And I'll give you an example. So while I was at Maersk, we launched a big training program called the Business Finance College. It ran throughout 2017. We took 475 people through that training program across the world. We even had in the last session in Dubai in December 2017, we had representatives from all continents except Antarctica. And I'm not sure if you can get a representative from there. So we had representatives from all continents. And you know what? The concept still worked. It was not like, if you meet a Chinese, they would say, that's not how we work. Or in South Africa, where actually we went to, I didn't, but some of my colleagues went to Cape Town, had a session down there as well. And everyone was like, this is cool, and I want to do it, and I'm in, and let's just get started, right? So I think, if you find a common language and way of working and something that excites people, like, working in new and exciting and interesting ways, you can cross those boundaries or cultural difference that of course are there. And I think, working in a multinational global company, we just learn to respect those, but also still get work done.
That helps. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I mean, you're a senior finance person, but you're also a content creator, and that's not something we see often. How did you find your niche? Because I mean, it feels very against the norm what you do.
Yeah. No, I think that's an interesting one. So I think, in the early days of my career, I started as a financial controller, and of course, a nice, interesting start. But I was really curious more about the business and actually using the numbers for something. So I changed from being a financial controller to a business controller. Now we are talking, the not the last decade, but the decade before that. And that was the period where the business partnering term was introduced at Maersk. And they said, now you're not business controllers, you are business partners, and you figure out how to do that. And there was no one really guiding us or directing us in terms of how to do it. And there was no real literature on it, and there was no one sharing their stories around it. And yes, if you're hard pressed, maybe you could find like a big four publication mentioning a bit about this. But essentially, when I then became a finance manager working in the US, I had some time for myself to reflect, and had my own office and whatnot. So I started sharing some content on LinkedIn, just articles I found and whatnot. And then in 2014, LinkedIn opened up its blogging platform. I had written a few blogs on other sites before, but nothing major. And I thought to myself, I'm going to grab this and run with it, and I'm going to try to be a blogger. And since May 2014, almost without exception, maybe except for a few holidays, I've published at least one article every week ever since. Now, in the beginning, it was about lots of different topics because, I'm new to the creator space, so I didn't necessarily know always what to write about. But I'll basically just pick an idea, like I think the 2000 and what was that 14 World Cup where Germany beat Brazil 7-1 or something like that. I wrote an article about that, even though it had nothing to do with finance, right? But I sort of, you know, just spun different stories. But over the years, it of course converged upon finance and into the space that I'm at now. And I've even defined my purpose along the way. I know that's a big thing these days, right? I said my purpose is to help finance and accounting professionals be successful in their careers and help finance functions drive value creation. So when I had defined that purpose, the content became even more niched into the space of finance. And it just evolved from there. I mean, I think it's a probably a whole live session in itself to talk about that specific journey. But today I have two newsletters that run on a weekly basis, Mondays and Thursdays. One is very specific on business, finance, and FP&A, and the other one is around general trends in finance and accounting. And those two newsletters running on LinkedIn in total have almost 150,000 subscribers, which means year to date, that blog as a total has been read by more than 2 million times. And when I started, it was maybe 10,000 a year, right? So it's a truly incredible journey. At least that's how I feel it. But it really just started with me sharing my story because no one else did. And I can only encourage others on the live today. I see some familiar faces here at least, but also in general. If you have something on heart, start sharing, because we need more stories about finance professionals, accounting professionals being successful in their careers. What are they doing? How are they doing it? And what can we learn from it? I'd love to hear more stories about that.
And like I said, I was telling Anders before we got on, I share a lot of his articles with my team when I was doing strategy sessions. I always had a slide for at least one of his articles. So if you're not following his newsletters on LinkedIn, go and check it out. So Anders, I noticed on your profile that you attended the business school in Copenhagen, but not to do an MBA, which I thought most people, where most people would do. You did a Master's of Science in Accounting. So why that choice? And would you recommend others do the same, or would you recommend them do an MBA or neither?
Yeah, so I think, on the topic of educational systems, it just works differently around the world, right? So I think maybe South Africa is more in the, let's say, the UK system somehow, right? With the chartered accountancy, and then you build something on top. In Denmark, it's different. So we do high school, and then if we are at least in my profession, you would do 5 years in the university, 3 years bachelor, 2 years master, and then mostly that's it, right? So I have a master in finance and accounting, and that's what I need mostly to perform finance roles in Denmark. I don't need to be a chartered accountant or as such. I don't need an MBA to work in business. This is good enough. Of course, I can always, if I want to learn more about sales, I could take an MBA in sales, but that's a different topic, of course. So it's just a different educational system. Why I ended up with a master's in finance and accounting, that's also a good long story. I had a short stint in HR, but I learned there that business leaders and people in business, they didn't like HR. They said, get out of my business. I can do this myself. You just post my job ad, and I'll take care of things. And I thought to myself, I was a 21-year-old student back then. Do I really want to spend the first 10 years of my career trying to convince people about all the great things that HR can do, which I still believe to this day that they can do? I said, nah, I'm going to go back into finance, because I also had some student jobs in finance. But of course, I find that in finance, it's exactly the same thing, right? Those finance people kind of just get out of my way, just give me the report, and I'll run my business, right? And, a guy can't keep running forever. So I spent the first 10 years of my career trying to convince people of all the good things that finance can actually do. And now I guess help to educate and develop people to be able to do the same thing in their businesses, not necessarily at a grand global scale, but in their businesses. And it's just hugely satisfying to see how this develops. I mean, we're doing a training program last week, face to face, believe it or not. And one participant came up to me and said that, she found my content a year ago. And when she did, she was kind of, lost in her career, not sure exactly what to do because she didn't have the classical accounting profile. But when she found that and learned about the business partnering piece, it gave her career new meaning and new direction. And now she was here in the training program to become a better business partner. And those, anecdotal stories that actually happen in real life, I mean, that's just the fuel that I need to keep going.
That's a great story. It's a great story. And what's one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
So I actually published an article on LinkedIn about this, albeit all the way back in 2014. But I think it's still relevant to this day. Um, as a young aspiring accountant, we often look towards the future and say, in 10 years or 15 years, whatever, I'm going to be a CFO or finance director or whatever you aspire to be. And I don't want to kill that dream. You should keep that dream. But my advice to you is to focus on what's happening right here, right now. Be in the now to perform the best you can perform in your role. Because if you're a high performer in your role, all the rest will take care of itself, almost. But if you focus too much about, okay, in 2 years I got to be here, in 5 years I got to be there, you become frustrated because you don't move fast enough and you don't perform well enough in your roles. I wish I had known this 15 years ago. I didn't. So I became frustrated. I pushed for things where I maybe should have waited. I didn't get the career progression I wanted, to be honest. And it meant I had to make a different choice for myself. And now I'm an entrepreneur, of course, and working more with sales and marketing and delivery. I don't touch anything with finance and numbers, actually, albeit, of course, working with finance professionals. And I learn so much every day, and I'm having so much fun. But maybe if I had that advice as my younger self, things would have turned out differently.
Probably all turned out correctly in the end. So let's move a little bit to questions. We've got a question from Mzunjani who says he's been connected with you for a long time and he sees how financial business partnering has been rolled out at Musk, and it seems finance earned the seat at the table. Was it because was it top lead? Sorry, was it top leadership was receptive to the concept, or was it finance pushing until they earned a seat?
Yeah, so I think it's probably the latter, at least as a start. Of course, finance functions in different companies have different histories, and the finance function at Maersk maybe historically didn't have a very strong presence at the executive table. So we really had to take that partnering approach. It was not like if finance said no or yes, people say, okay, finance, we're going to do this, or no, okay, then we won't do it. It was like, okay, finance, we've heard you, but we're still going to do what we want. So we really had to take a partnering approach and convince, leaders from there. Because if you're a business leader and you have a strong business partner, I bet you they listen to the business partner, and I bet you have influence. But if you don't have that clear mandate from the top, then you need to take a partner approach. And that's what we did at Maersk. Of course, today they'll be more receptive and listen more, but it's still the partnering approach that's prevalent. But I'd say today we tend to try and push finance in a different direction to say that, okay, yes, business partnering is good, and of course we should do that, but we should recognize that as finance and accounting professionals, we have an unfair advantage. We have something in something that no one else in the company has. We have understanding of the business. We have analytical capabilities. We span across the entire value chain. We have a seat at the table. Not necessarily we are listened to just because we have the seat at the table, but we are typically in the decision-making forum. And, there's no one else in the company that has all those things. And by the way, we also have access to financial and non-financial numbers. We have an unfair advantage. And we need to put that unfair advantage into play. We just need to get that influencing piece working as well. And that's why we need the business partner. Because if we have no influence, you know what happens, you guys? Top management calls the consultants, the McKinseys, the BCGs of the world, and they come in. And you know who they ask for data and input? They ask finance. And you know what they do? They do the work that finance should have done, and then they come up with the same conclusions and same suggestions that finance should have come up with. And you know who the top management thanks for it? Not finance, the consultants. But we could do this if you unlock the unfair advantage of finance. So yes, business partnering is a piece of that, but it's about unlocking that unfair advantage. And I think this is really key because we have something that no one else has in the company.
Being able to sell your ideas becomes very important in that position.
Exactly. If you can't sell them, just go home. It doesn't matter how many unfair advantages you have, you need to be able to sell it.
Any last few words from you, or anything you want to discuss, or you want the audience to know that we didn't discuss earlier?
I think we touched upon it, but the key thing is that the finance and accounting profession is changing, and I'm sure everyone listening in today have heard this before, but it's true. We uncovered it with the data point from the CFO Now report by Accenture, but it's changing, and it's for all accountants out there to decide, what does my future career path look like? And in broad terms, I see three. Probably there are more, but I see three. One of them is, of course, the business partnering piece, using the numbers for something, influencing stakeholders. That role is there to stay for the next 20 or 30 years until you have a robot that can say, okay, given everything we know, you should do this. Okay, I do this, and then we see what happens, right? We're not at this point yet. So business partnering is one aspect. Then, of course, there'll always be the need for the technical accountants to either form the standards or implement the standards, or let's say reconfigure how the robot should work. So there will be a space for those technical accountants. But there'll be a need for a lot less those classic accountants than we have today. So that's the second path. I think the third path is really going down that data science analytics route. And because accountants, we know numbers, and we're detailed, structured people, so we should have a good knack for actually going into this field as well, even though it is a different field. But I think many of us would love to go into this field because we love working with the numbers and deep diving on them, and maybe we need to learn a few coding languages like R or Python or whatever. But we can learn that. It's not going to be a big deal. So those are the three broad career tracks that I see. And to anyone live today and those listening in afterwards, I would ask, have you made your choice of where to go? And if not, maybe you should make that choice, because it's going to define your career going forward.
You've got a choice to make. That's a great way to end. Make sure you subscribe to Anders's content on LinkedIn. I've learned so much from it, so just please check him out. The show has been live on YouTube and will be available on podcast by tomorrow. If you were watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast and you feel this added value to you, don't forget to like and subscribe and click on the notification bell so that you get automatically notified when the next episode comes out. Anders, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Wes. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us for another episode of Two Ways to Skin a Cat. Goodbye.